Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Building SaaS on AWS, the AWS SaaS Factory show for builders of SaaS here on Twitch. My name is Anthony McClure and I am a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory team and your host for today's show. If you are currently a builder of software as a service solutions, or even just beginning to get started in learning how to design, build, deploy, and operate applications in multi-tenant environments, then this is the show for you. As in every episode, we strive to bring in subject matter experts into the many varied aspects of software as a service, and today is certainly no exception. But before we dive in and see what our current show is about and bring in our guest for today, I first want to make a big hello and welcome to everybody that is joining us today live here on Twitch. If you haven't already, please jump into the comments section, say hello, let us know where you're from, and while you're there, be sure to say hi to Bill Tarr, who once again is acting as our moderator there in chat today. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to ask those inside of our chat as well. And we'll try to get to those, bring those live if we have the opportunity to talk with our guest as well. That being said, let's go ahead then and jump right on into our topic of today. So on today's show, we actually have a pretty interesting topic as we are talking about a service called AWS AppFabric. Many of you may not be familiar with what AppFabric is or why it's important and how it can help you and your customers with SaaS. So to help us learn more about this service, I'd like to go ahead and add to the show at this time, Mr. Bobby Williams. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself, Bobby, what you do for AWS?
Sure. So my name is Bobby Williams. I am a solutions architect at AWS. I am on the AppFabric service team. So in helping doing things like this and talking to folks about AppFabric and cybersecurity topics and how you might use it within your own application or use it within your organization to help with your SaaS application cybersecurity needs.
Very interesting. Yes, and obviously, I feel that AppFabric has a pretty important security relationship to it here, but many of our audience members may not even understand or know much about this particular AWS service. So why don't we go ahead and just start out with, what exactly is AppFabric?
Yeah. So AppFabric is a managed service. So it's a low code or no code service that helps collect data from SaaS applications and then put them in a place where you can use it for analytic purposes or for threat detection or for incident response purposes, or you can even do cool things with it, like use it for generative AI summaries if you wanted to um, do machine learning things with it, if you wanted to do AI things with the data. So it ultimately helps collect things from multiple SaaS applications, normalize the data into a common format. So we're using the open cybersecurity schema framework. There's a lot to say. We usually just call that OCSF because that's a lot easier to say than the long names. But that's a standard format that both AWS and other security platforms are using to sort of standardize on one way to deliver SaaS application audit logs, so that when you start building analytical solutions on it, it doesn't really matter what the source is, because the format that you use for your analysis purposes is all the same, right? And
Sure.
AppFabric helps do that across multiple applications. So if you have, let's say you have your preferred video conferencing application, you have your preferred chat application, you have your preferred whiteboarding application, you can use all of those. They have their own disparate formats. Everybody does it in their own way. Builders who are listening on this show probably have their own like formats that they use. And what we don't want to do is sort of force everybody who wants to consume your data to do it in the same way. So we help them with that. You give it to us in in your standard way. We convert it into OCSF so that people can use it in so that people can build their analysis on top of it.
Interesting. So All that being said, and that sounded like a very wide array of functionality. Certainly, I hear a lot of interoperability talked about in there when
Yeah.
dealing with different SaaS services. But what are some of the challenges that you see customers have that really App Fabric comes in and fills that need and helps them out?
Yeah, no, that's an awesome question because what we've noticed, like everybody, like I mentioned before, we all have like our favorite tools, right? And
Mhm.
there's a couple of different ways that you can get the same data from all of them. You can move to one that where it's sort of an all-in-one. Everybody does everything. It does, it's the one size fits all for everyone, right? So that's one way to do it. Then you get the same data out of that. Or you can sort of have to you build the solution for yourself, right? So let's say you've got a Slack and you've got I don't know, Zoom and you've got Miro and you've got Smartsheet, but you want to keep using all of those, but everybody wants to make it easier on themselves to analyze the data, to understand what
Mhm.
people are doing within those SaaS applications. So typically what we see is you build it, right? You build an integration
Right.
to Slack, and then you build a different integration to Zoom, and then you build a different integration to Miro, you build a different integration to Microsoft, you build a different integration to all of them, and it gets really, really difficult. The first one is easy, the second one gets a little bit more challenging, the 10th one gets really, really hard because by the time you got to the 10th one, the first one is broken, right? So then you go back and fix the first one, but now there's a 13th one that you have to go and build. So it gets to be really challenging to just manage all of that when you're building it yourself. Small organizations tend to, in our experience, tend to build the high priority ones. So, you'll figure out, well, these are the ones that have the most opportunity for intrusion. So you'll build really, really powerful analytics and observability solutions into those. And then the other ones you just kind of do as things happen. So I'll just go and look at the logs manually for those. And I guess that's really it's a really tough challenge to solve for because the overhead of building all of those is difficult, right? And so
Sure.
App
Mhm.
Fabric helps make that a lot easier. Instead of building all of those individual integrations that I just talked about, you just build the integration into App Fabric, and then we handle all of that heavy lifting of integrating to each of those individual services, offerings, or
Interesting. So
applications.
yeah, so we actually have a question from the audience that came in
Sure.
here. Yeah, so Adam Check says, "Is App Fabric built on top of other AWS services?" That's kind of a loaded question, but
Yeah, no. So if you look at the graphic that we have on the screen, you'll see a couple of other additional AWS services that App Fabric integrates with really nicely. So when you're using App Fabric, if you're taking data out of your source applications, you can actually send that to an Amazon S3 bucket. Which is where you could collect all of your data, or you can send it into an Amazon data fire hose that then can connect to other AWS services. So let's say you wanted to build a data warehouse out of all of your SaaS application logs, and you wanted to do it in Amazon Redshift. So you could go App Fabric to Data Firehose to Redshift, right? That's an integration pattern that would work perfectly fine with that Fabric. And now you have a data warehouse built on all AWS offerings. Or maybe you want to
Mhm.
build a data lake, right, with all of your security data that includes the stuff that comes out of your SaaS applications, as well as things that come from your AWS infrastructure. Because like doing security things is more than just your infrastructure, it's more than just your SaaS applications, it's all of the things. The builders watching this show are probably dealing with lots of how do you secure your infrastructure, right? So perhaps you want to
Mhm.
build a data lake with all of that information in, so you can integrate App Fabric with something like Amazon Security Lake, where now you can do analysis on not only your SaaS applications, but you can integrate things that come from, let's say, CloudTrail, or stuff that comes from your S3 event. So maybe you want to find out somebody authenticated with your IDP, right? And then they access some things in your S3 bucket. So something like
Mhm.
App Fabric plus Amazon Security Lake will let you find both of those out of that same source of data.
Interesting. Yeah. Great. So we've talked a lot, I think, about this concept of interoperability between all these different SaaS solutions, and having App Fabric is kind of the glue between them to
Yeah.
take all that disparate data and unify it together. But then the other side of that as well, okay, well, what do you do with that, right? So how then does
What
App
now?
Fabric take that data that's been captured and help to enhance an organization's security and observability?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we hear this question a lot. Like, in the hey, I have all the data. What now? Like, what can I do with it now
Yeah,
that I've got it all put
exactly.
into a place? I'm collecting it, and that's awesome. But I actually want to build something on top of that. So you can use something. You can use many security platforms will integrate with AppFabric, and most of the time, as long as they can integrate with Amazon S3 or they can integrate with the data fire hose, and they know how to take like OCSF data format, then you can use those security platforms to build interesting dashboards on it or build get alerts from the data that comes in through AppFabric. So let's say you wanted to know if you're subject to like password spraying attack, right? Where the typical
Sure.
pattern for that is, and for those on the call who's not familiar with password spraying, that's when somebody takes a password and then sends it to a bunch of different accounts within your organization. A lot of them will fail, but maybe one of them will succeed, right? And so you'll see that as, oh, today there were 1,000 failed logins and then one successful one, and that'll show up. So perhaps you might set yourself an alert to find those 1,000 failed logins, so you'll know ahead of time that hey, there's an incident that's going on. There's an incident that may be happening within my organization because it's probably unusual that 1,000 employees are all logging in incorrectly all at once. Um, you could also do things like
Hopefully, right?
fingers crossed. We do see stuff like if your organization has like long holidays where everybody's out and then everybody comes back and half of the organization's after the organization's passwords have expired, right? That's the thing that might show up as an indicator in your logs as well. And so you'll want to be able to distinguish between everybody just came back off of holiday, so there's going to be some weirdness for a little while, or
Mhm.
versus everybody's been here for a while and there's this really interesting day where we had all these failed logins, and that's something that
Right.
we want to go investigate. you know
Hmm.
Other things that are in there include stuff like maybe you want to take the IP addresses that are in the log files and compare them against known malicious IP database, right? And
Mhm.
because AppFabric is normalizing all the data into a single format, it's easy to get all the IP addresses out of all of the logs from every application that you have connected to it without having to know, well, let's see, Slack puts it in this place, but Asana puts it in that place. And now I have to know them
Mhm.
individually. And then you can compare them against the malicious IP database and find out whether you have some connections coming into your network from places that
Potential
are
problem, right?
known, yeah,
Right. Yeah.
to be not great. So you can build these sorts of things that help improve your observability. Reduce the time that it takes to figure out that something's not quite right, or maybe there's an attack that's pending, that's in progress on your applications.
Yeah. Very interesting. So, a lot of I think what we've discussed thus far is a little bit of an interesting twist, especially when for topics that we talk about on this show, right? Because most of the time we're usually talking about how you build out full SaaS applications and
Yeah.
kind of being that SaaS provider. But AppFabric, looks at this very much from the customer side of the story too, and in many cases,
Hmm.
our builders are customers of SaaS themselves
Right.
in multiple different ways. So it's interesting to see this viewpoint of integrating multiple SaaS solutions together to get all this interesting data from it. But at the same time, for our builders out there that are producing their own SaaS applications, is there a place for them as well? Can they participate in AppFabric too?
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. So I'm going to show you this one here. So one thing to think about is if you're a builder, you can either be you can be a producer of SaaS applications, audit logs, or you can be, like let's say you wanted to be a receiver of the normalized data. So for folks
Hmm.
for SaaS application builders who want to maybe you want to participate in, let's go this way. So this list is the list of currently integrated applications that perhaps you want to have your logo on this list, or perhaps you want to be a part of if customers are using your SaaS application in addition to other applications on this list, then they want to also uh, integrate yours into that security platform that they're building. We see lots of customers who have lots of these different applications. You'll probably see some on this list that maybe not necessarily unusual, but you might not expect, right? Because we expect that we want everybody to have the flexibility to use the applications that they want. So if you're building something super cool that you feel that's in a space that you can serve really well and you want to be on this list, there's some things that you can do to make it possible for AppFabric to get audit logs out of your application and put them and normalize them so that so that other users who are building SaaS observability things can use it.
Interesting.
And it's a couple of most of the time, almost all of the time, we're using your public APIs. So if you're building something, like make some APIs available for AppFabric to call to one, get the audit logs out of your data. And then we'll take care of the normalization and putting them into a place, but also getting user details. Because one thing that's really interesting about AppFabric is, in addition to the normalization, AppFabric does some enrichment of the audit logs as well. One thing that we found is everybody wants to know who did it, right? Like you logged in,
right,
and I want to know which user was associated with that. But sometimes we see that the user IDs or the identification for the users is maybe a little bit obfuscated. Like some SaaS applications produce user IDs that are in their specific format. And like for me, I want to know an email address, right? I want to know a name. So if you make it possible for us to like use the ID that might be naturally in your audit logs and then give us another API that we can call, where we can get the details of the user, we can then enrich those events that get put, in the output data. And that's pretty much it from giving AppFabric, making it possible for AppFabric to get the data. The other thing I'll mention here is for builders, AppFabric today can authenticate to your application in a couple of ways, right? So we can do authentication. Most of the application that we connect to, we authenticate with OAuth, right? So if you provide an OAuth-based authentication mechanism where your users can get a client ID and a client secret from your application and then plug it into AppFabric to give AppFabric access to your application, that's one route. We can also do it with account tokens. So if you wanted to make it possible for your users to get like a personal access token or a service account token that then gives access to this particular data, that would work as well in your application. And one more thing to consider is scopes. So a lot of the applications that we connect to today, it's good practice to sort of limit the scope, right? You don't want to give AppFabric access to everything, right? So, make it possible so that your users can limit the scope to like audit logs and user details, and that's it. And that way, they don't get some funny feelings about, oh, well, I'm giving this AWS offering access to like my whole thing. No, we don't really want that. What we want you to do is make it possible for them to say AWS can see the audit logs, AWS can see the user details, and there's a mechanism for our users to do that.
Interesting. So we've talked a little bit here then about these different destinations for data and data sources that can come into AppFabric. Can you show us that list again, or talk about what the destinations and data sources are?
Oops, I zoomed it. I didn't want to.
A little too far.
That's good. So I've got one of these magic mice, and sometimes like it thinks I double clicked on it and I didn't. Oh no, I don't single click. Yeah. So this list, we talked about it a little bit before. It's separated with sources and destinations. So if you think about the very first diagram we showed, where the sources are all on the left and the destinations are all on the right, and this one, the sources are all on the top and the destinations are all on the bottom. And we've got things, you'll see in here, a lot of these things are productivity focused on the sources side. So, there's stuff like project management, there's stuff like identity providers, there's documentation, docs and power and presentation softwares, video conferencing,
and infrastructure. Yeah, there's all
infrastructure things. And then on the destination side, there's a lot of really powerful security platforms that you can use as well on there. And these are in addition to the ones that come directly from AWS, right? So you could also use this in combination with something like Amazon QuickSight, which gives you a business intelligence tool, or Amazon OpenSearch, which would give you a search index on top of your data. So the ones that showed up here in the data destinations, these all are destinations that can connect with AWS from S3 or Data Firehose, and they also They're also compatible with OCSF, so there isn't any there isn't any normalization that you would have to do, or transformation that you would have to do to get it into these sources, right? You can just send the OCSF formatted logs directly to the source, directly to the destination, and then you'd be able to build your security platform on top of that.
So speaking of that open cybersecurity schema framework, right? The that OCSF.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just talk a little bit more about that? Because that really seems to be kind of the underlying glue, right, that makes all of this possible. So, yeah, can we get a little bit more about that and how AppFabric uses it? And
Yeah.
why is it the better solution than some other type of data normalization?
Yeah, no. So OCSF, like I said, is the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework, and it is a mechanism that we use to normalize the data, and it's really powerful framework because it's both a schema and a method of providing security data. And the way that the information is designed in OCSF is by separating everything into categories, right? So, like, your DNS logs will be in the DNS logs category, and your uh,
Okay.
information and access management will be in an information and access management
So
category.
there's sort
And
of some partitioning of the data based on what its purpose or where it came from, kind of thing.
exactly, and it's all in the one format, and so that makes it possible for you to then partition it downstream. So if you wanted to only look at your things that came from your IDP, from your identity provider, you can easily find those. Or if you want to find the things that came from your firewall, you can easily find those within the data. And then that also makes it possible for us to take the data from all of these disparate types of applications and put them into one format that's then easily understood downstream.
Yeah,
And
interesting. Okay.
the other
Yeah.
great thing about OCSF is that it's compatible with a wide range of security platforms as well. So not just, I talked about Security Lake earlier. Security Lake is also using OCSF. So if you wanted to build the data lake, data coming out of AppFabric is naturally compatible with data that you would normally get from Security Lake.
Interesting. Well, I think at this point, our audience is probably a little interested in actually seeing maybe how all of this comes together and starts working here. Maybe even before we jump into that, though, any final thoughts or what you can tell us about specific requirements that may exist in order to use this framework, either on the data source or the destination side?
No specific requirements that you'll need to use it, and you'll see during the. I'll give a little demo of how you set it up. It's really straightforward. It takes much longer to talk about it than it is to like get an application set up. And I've done lots of demos where like some people are talking in the background, and I'm furiously setting up different integrations to different SaaS applications. A lot of them, and I'll show it to you during the demo. We have for each of these applications because the applications are separate, they have their own sort of authentication mechanisms, and like where
Hmm.
you find the information that you need to connect the AppFabric are in different places. So like for builders watching the stream, one thing to think about is making some of this information easy to access for users who want to use AppFabric, so that they can connect your application in with AppFabric if you wanted them to do that. And I'll show you one way that one particular provider does this. But other than that, that's probably the only real thing to call out for that.
All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, great. Can you go ahead and then let's take a look at setting up and configuring AppFabric.
Will do.
Get another view here.
Yep. There we go.
I think we're coming up. 1 second, and there we go.
Bingo. Very nice.
So,
So
what are
you
we
should
looking at
see.
here?
So this is the AppFabric console within AWS. This is the landing page that you'll see when you want to use AppFabric for the first
So
time.
this is in the our customer's account then at this point.
Yeah, so this would be in your customer's AWS account. So if they wanted to connect with your SaaS application, or if you wanted to use AppFabric as a part of your security program, you would either go into your AWS account and go to the AppFabric part of the console to see this, or your customers would see this in their AWS console when you get to the point of wanting to integrate your application.
Got it.
Now, so AppFabric, connecting AppFabric to a SaaS application is sort of 3 steps. You create this app bundle thing. It's really just a construct for collecting AppFabric resources in an AWS region. So you can have one AppFabric app bundle per region. This is also the place where you can choose your encryption mechanism. So, security focused service where you take security very seriously. So we want you to have control over how your data, if you're using it, or how your customers' data is secured. So they'll have an opportunity to choose their own encryption key if they would like. And then you authorize an application. So if you want one of your applications to be connected with AppFabric, this is the place where they would choose that. So they'll see a list. And then step 3 is setting up an ingestion. And that's just telling AppFabric where you want to put the data in the end. So I'll walk through those for one application. I'm going to use Okta for this particular demo. Okta is super popular, and it's, I use it for a lot of demos, and it's really easy to get to some of the information that we'll need for the demo. I mentioned encryption before. This is the place where your customers can choose an encryption key if they would like to encrypt the data if they would like to manage their own encryption for it, or they can use an AWS owned key. So we always encrypt the data that comes in from a customer. So if they're your customer, their data is going to be encrypted coming from your SaaS application, or if you're using it, your data is going to be encrypted coming through AppFabric. You can either use the key that we own and manage and rotate on your behalf, or one that you own and manage and rotate on your behalf. For this demo, I'm going to use an AWS owned key because it makes it a little bit more simple to get through the rest of the steps. The next step is choosing an app. So, for the builders on watching the stream, if we get to the point where you want your application to show up in the list, this is the list that they would pick from, that your customers would pick from. Or if you're using it, this is the list that you would pick from for the application that you use within your organization. This is the same list that we were looking at from before. So for this demo, I'm going to pick Okta. I mentioned the information that you have to collect. So you have to tell us what tenant is. So for builders on the call, if you have multi-tenant SaaS applications, give your users some mechanism to find out what their tenant is. There was a lot of applications on our list. Some of them make it easier than others to figure out what your tenant name is. This is really helpful for users because we found that we have one customer who has, for instance, 3 different instances of Slack. They want to put their security on all of them. And so we give you an opportunity to do that here, where they would put their first instance of Slack in the tenant ID, then the second one, then the third one, and all of those instances of Slack are coming in through AppFabric, getting normalized and landing in one spot, and no one individual has to manage all of those connections.
Nice. Yeah, so everybody out there that's listening, that was actually a really great tidbit of wisdom from Bobby there. When you're building SaaS, make sure and give your end users, your tenants down the road, self-service capability to learn information about their own environment, especially when you're trying to do interactions like this. So yeah, great tip, Bobby.
Yeah, no, it's that's good. From Okta, for Okta for this demo, the tenant is the domain name. We see that particular pattern a bunch, where the domain that you go to is also the tenant. So if that happens to be the tenant name for the builders watching the stream, then they would use that here. We give you an opportunity to give it a free form name as well, right? So I'm going to call this the AppFabric Okta account. Spell it right. There we go. Spell it right. That's better. And this helps when you're looking at all the tenants in the list. Let's say your customers have 100 SaaS apps that they want to connect to this, right? And so finding them within that, this is pretty well unique, but this is a little bit more human readable, right? And so if somebody who's not necessarily super technical wants to come in here and set this up, this is an opportunity for them to be able to do that, and also be able to manage the resources after you've created them. Because instead of saying, okay, I need you to go to dev-957499959.okta.com, you can just say, hey, go click on that one that says AppFabric Okta.
Yeah, just a much easier, right? More human readable way of knowing which is which, right?
Yeah, and it makes it easier to talk to other folks about it and this sort of thing. I mentioned that one thing that I'll show you in here is I mentioned restricting the scope of the applications so that AppFabric only has access to the things that it needs. So you'll see here in this list, I've given AppFabric access to logs.read for Okta, as well as users.read for Okta and nothing else, right? And so that limits
Right.
AppFabric's ability to see any of the other things in my Okta tenant here, and reduces the scope.
So, in theory, though, if there was other data that you wanted to supply through AppFabric, you could enable that, and then it would flow through.
That's correct. And there may be some instances in the future where everything from a particular tenant is going to be flowing through AppFabric and then into the destination bucket. And in that case, you might want a little bit more uh, permissiveness within your grants there.
So before we step further here, Bobby, I just want to re-announce to everybody that may have joined us a little bit later that you're currently watching Building SaaS on AWS. I am joined here today, Bobby Williams, who's a solutions architect with the AWS AppFabric team, and we're discussing AppFabric and how it can help consumers of SaaS products and builders of SaaS products to assist in observability and gathering data regarding your security posture. So, all right. So we've started to put some information in here. It looks like we need a little bit more, though. So.
Yep, that's right. The last two bits that you need, I mentioned before on the call that many of the applications that AppFabric is connected to today are OAuth applications. So for OAuth applications, if you're building one and you want to give credentialed access via OAuth, you would make it possible for your users to grab a client ID and a client secret, right? And that also helps them isolate AppFabric to a particular one. So if they wanted to, I don't want to connect to AppFabric. I don't want AppFabric connected to our application anymore. They want to deny access. You give them the ability to go and then delete that OAuth credential, and then we won't have access to the data anymore, and it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
So I will
as soon as that's revoked and gone away, no more access, right? So
that's right. And it also does a second thing, because AppFabric is now going to be accessing your customer's SaaS application tenant. And if you're building a SaaS application, it would be one thing that you can think about is also logging the accesses coming through OAuth. Like, everybody's probably going to do that as well. And then those accesses will then show up in your audit logs. So like for Okta, for instance, if we go look at the Okta logs that I have connected to this account, you'll also see accesses from AppFabric in there. So they won't get lost. It'll be in there amongst
nothing's obfuscated, right? Yeah, it's all
right.
Still there. It's all available if you do need to get access to that information at some point too. Yeah.
Exactly right. So I'm going to click connect. Because this is an OAuth application, it's asking me for my password on another screen. So I'm going to type that in. And I'm going to click verify. And ta-da! We've connected now Okta. We've connected now AppFabric to Okta, and you can imagine that we would connect. If this was your SaaS application, it would be that simple for one of your customers to connect AppFabric in with your SaaS application. And then the last thing that your customers will do is tell AppFabric where do they want the data to go. That's the last bit of interaction that they would have to do directly in your SaaS application in order to get connected with it. So I don't necessarily have to touch Okta specifically anymore for this particular demonstration. If I had multiple Okta tenants, so perhaps your customers have deployed multiple tenants of your SaaS application, they would show up here for them to select. And then they choose a destination. And like we mentioned before, the destinations can either be a data fire hose, if you wanted to go to one of the destinations that's supported by Amazon Data Firehose, or you can make a new S3 bucket or choose an existing S3 bucket. So for this, I'm going to choose an existing S3 bucket that I've already have just for expediency's sake. I will choose this one because it happens to already be set up in my account. There are two other options that your customers are going to get. They can choose a prefix in the S3 bucket. So let's say they want to use an S3 bucket that has multiple different types of logs in it. or
Hmm.
multiple different types of data in it, and you want the AppFabric stuff to go to a specific place so that it's partitioned away from everything else. You can choose your own optional prefix, but you can also choose the schema and format. So we talked a bunch about the open cybersecurity schema framework. But AppFabric also gives you the opportunity to keep the data in the original raw format, and that has shown itself to be handy for organizations who want to archive the data in its original format in like S3 in a inexpensive tier on S3, but then they want normalized data for threat hunting and incident response and that sort of thing. So you can do both. There's not,
Nice.
this isn't necessary. This doesn't have to be an either or type of scenario. And we have customers who've done both. They've sent some data into an S3 bucket for archival purposes that stay there for a year or two in this raw format. And then send some stuff to a different, send it downstream to their security platform in the normalized way. You'll see
Excellent.
that we also have support in here for Parquet. So Parquet, for those who aren't familiar with Parquet, it's a columnar format for high performance searching. So if you wanted to do, like big data application, and you're going to have petabytes of logs, perhaps you want to think about Parquet because it gives you
Right.
a really nice ability to partition the data. Parquet isn't superhuman readable. Right. So, you will need an application to go and get
Always
the
a
data and
trade-off.
transform it. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
But it's super duper fast,
Yeah.
especially when you
Especially if
get
you're
into
doing any
large
kind of large.
projects.
Yeah. Anytime you're doing large data analysis, Parquet is certainly the way to go for that. So it's nice that
Yep.
it's supported. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So I'm going to choose JSON because it's human readable for this particular demo, but either one would work just fine. And then I'll hit set up destinations, and that's it. Right. So now I have my AppFabric account connected with a SaaS application and delivering data to an S3 bucket that I just set up. And like I said before, it's when you're going through and you're doing them, it's far faster to do them this way than the alternative way, which would have been to build an integration specifically in Okta, which means I need to go understand the Okta data format, then I need to build the parsers, then I need to build
Right.
and then I need to build the interconnecting pipeline service, right? And then I need to build how it writes to the storage location, and then I need to build all the error handling. Like it takes care of all of that stuff just by going through these particular steps in the
And
console.
then when one of your connections just randomly decides to change the API one day, to go
Exactly,
back and fix it, right?
exactly,
Been
exactly
there.
right. That never happens, right? No,
No,
the
never,
APIs never
never.
change ever.
No. So one other quick question for you then, Bobby.
Yes.
Obviously, working through this through the console is great. What about as far as infrastructure as code options? Can this all be built out with CDK or other or straight cloud
Yep.
formation?
There is an API for AppFabric, so it doesn't have CDK and or CloudFormation support today. There is Terraform support. So if you go on the HashiCorp in the HashiCorp Terraform provider, there are AWS AppFabric resources that should be merged into the repository very soon, actually. So you can go like we can drop a link to that particular thing in the chat so that folks can go. And if you want to follow the ticket that we have for Terraform resources, you can do that. And if you don't want to do Terraform, there is a full featured API to do all of these things. There's a full featured API that we can use. Yeah, perfect.
It was funny.
There's an
We
API
got
that
this
you can
question right as you were talking about that. So
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, we are actively building the Terraform resources into the official AWS Terraform provider. And they're under review right now. It's all public in the GitHub. And like I said, I'll drop a link in here before the show ends, so that we'll have a direct link to that.
excellent, thanks, and thank you for the question, Murder Show 72.
Yeah,
Thank you.
awesome.
Okay, so at this point, then, in theory, we have everything set up and connected between between AppFabric and Okta. So
Yes.
so what's next?
Yeah. So this is the point where you might say, we talked about it a little bit earlier. What now? Like, what do I do? What do I
Yeah,
do
what do
with
you
the
do
data?
now?
Yeah,
Right.
so I'm gonna show a dashboard that I've built. I'm gonna show a couple of dashboards that I've built in OpenSearch that use AppFabric data. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe I need to blow it up a little bit. I said that looks good.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a little better. Thanks.
a little better. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And so this dashboard is using AppFabric data. You see, I have a bunch of applications connected to it. This particular dashboard is tracking data exports. So I haven't talked about it yet, but one of the possible things that you can look for is data exfiltration within your SaaS applications. And the cool thing about AppFabric is it can be data exfiltration information across multiple applications. It doesn't have to necessarily be one or two, or you're counting on like each individual application sending you a report that says, hey, there's been an unusual amount of data that exited your
Right.
system
So for
lately.
anomaly
Yeah,
detection, that'd be interesting, right? If there's kind of a baseline of data flow that you expect from the application, and suddenly there's a huge spike, right?
exactly. Sort of like this.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
I've put in this particular dashboard. So this OpenSearch cluster, for those who aren't familiar with OpenSearch, it is a search engine with some dashboards, with some dashboarding and alerting capability on top of it that you can run within your AWS. That you can run within your AWS account. It gives you lots of powerful capabilities to search your data. Like I mentioned really early in the call about being able to do sort of machine learning type things. So maybe you want to calculate embeddings on your applications and then stuff them
Mm-hmm.
into an OpenSearch cluster that you can use for a retrieval augmented generation type solution using your audit logs. So you can get into some like generative AI
Interesting.
things. OpenSearch would allow you to do those kinds of things. In addition to that, it lets you build really pretty dashboards that you can send to non-technical folks if they want to look at how your security data is doing, or if they want to keep track of what happens to be going on. In this dashboard, I can kind of see the traffic ratio by application. I can track whether there's an anomaly on the exported data. I can see which IP address it came from, and I can see which users that it came from. And this is really helpful for being able to for being able to quickly see when something looks unusual, and being able to quickly figure out which user was it, and then take some action on that.
Yeah. Is there any way that we could actually take a look at the raw data, or do you have any raw data as far as what this looks like, Bobby, that you could show?
Absolutely. So one of the things that OpenSearch lets you do is see the original source events that made up the dashboard. So this is the discovery view in OpenSearch. It's looking at all of my AppFabric data. I'm going to expand one here just to kind of show you what the data model for that looks like. So an interesting thing in here, I talked about the categories earlier in OCSF. Okay, so this is an identity and access management event for removing a user. So you can track when users
Hmm.
are added or when users are removed. And it's really easy to find them because I can isolate these events and then see all of the identity management events. You can also see in here the original format. So one cool thing about AppFabric, actually don't need to explain it. One cool thing about AppFabric is I showed you that you can put the raw data in a place that gives you the
Hmm.
original event. We also include it in the OCSF event. So if for whatever reason AppFabric doesn't map your data from your application in the right kind of way or to the right field, your application's users can still get at the raw data from right in the OCSF event, and it will land here in this raw data.
Kind of a raw
We
format,
have seen
JSON.
some. Yeah. So it's in JSON. So you'd pull it out, you'd parse into JSON, and then you can go in and pull out whatever individual piece of thing. If that happens, it'd be really handy to also tell us so that we'll know, and then we can go make an adjustment to that as well. And in OpenSearch, you can go through all of these events and look for oops, see, there's that Zoom thing again. There we are. You can go through and look at all these events and look at all of the information that came out of the event in the OCSF format. And then the other thing is you can search for it. So let's say I wanted to see all the things that came from Asana, right? So I can search for Asana by product name because the AppFabric events include the OCSF category as well as which product it came from. So if I want to find all the Asana ones, I can look for Asana. If I want to find if your users want to find all the ones from your application, they can look at this one field and isolate all of the events from your application to see what's happening in there.
I can imagine with this kind of data, this is probably very valuable. This aggregation, especially of all of this data into a centralized location, for customers that are concerned about meeting security compliance framework security compliance frameworks, getting through audits and things like that as well, right? Do you see
Yes.
that too?
Yes. Yeah. We see this pattern quite a bit. Being able to have like a year's worth of data that happened across all of your audit logs in an event that an actual audit happens, especially in sort of the financial services industry. Lots of audits, you have to keep your data for a really long time from all of the applications. So being able to collect it into one place and have it stored in really cost effective storage within AWS has shown to be really important for folks who have these sort of regulatory compliance and audit log tracing and requirements.
Yeah. So anybody out there in Twitch world in our comments section have any further questions for Bobby, please feel free to put those into the chat for us here. We'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have there, as
Absolutely.
we are starting to get towards the end of our time here together. But Bobby, I also wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to maybe any best practices or considerations that you would like to tell our audience, or let them know when they're looking to integrate AppFabric with other AWS services or security tools. So just any best practices or thoughts?
Yeah, no, like one thing to consider is what the input for that downstream tool looks like. We talked about, just I sort of hinted on the speed versus human readability thing earlier today. So if your downstream process, you need really high performance on searches, maybe consider using Parquet. If you're going to go into Security Lake, like Security Lake's data is also in Parquet format. So like if you wanted to build a big data lake, Parquet is a great option, a great option for that. If you want to send the raw data to like another person, JSON is a great option for that. If you only need dashboarding capability, like you want to build really beautiful dashboards that you can send to other folks, but you don't necessarily need all of the intricate searching capability that we just looked at in OpenSearch. Maybe consider something like QuickSight, right? If you're using QuickSight, though, you're going to want the data to come out in JSON format, because ultimately QuickSight is going to sit on top of Amazon Athena, which is going to query your data in place in S3. And you wouldn't use Parquet for that, because Athena is going to query the JSON data, the raw JSON data. So for that path, you'll want to choose JSON so that you can get it into QuickSight. And then that unlocks things like QuickSight Q, which is QuickSight's generative AI capabilities that can build summaries on your data, can generate like data reports automatically for you. So when we're thinking about best practices, I sort of consider what your end state is going to be. So I want my data to go into Splunk, or I want my data to go into OpenSearch, or I want my data to go into Logs.io, and sort of back up from there for what their specific requirements are. So you'll get the best pathway coming out of AppFabric. Because like if you're going into OpenSearch, you probably want a data fire hose, because that'll integrate OpenSearch. Or OpenSearch has this capability for OpenSearch ingestion pipelines, which can sync data out of an S3 bucket. But you'll need to know that ahead of time to put your data in the S3 bucket, so that you can use the OpenSearch ingestion pipeline to get it into OpenSearch. So those are sort of the things that when I'm talking to customers about OpenSearch and OpenSearch AppFabric and their total security platform, are things that we think through and talk through there. One other thing that I'll mention is your data quantity, right? So the data load. Mm-hmm. So if you've got 100 applications and you're expecting that your application is going to generate a petabyte of data, right? You'll want to start thinking about data lifecycle policies. How much retention do you need? If you need a year's worth of retention and you want it in S3, perhaps think about setting policies that drop the data down to a lower tier, maybe after a month or two or something, or something like that. Or if your SaaS application is going to be really chatty with the logs, right? Then have something where your users can find out, hey, we're probably going to produce a terabyte of data a month. Right. And then they can start thinking about what their data storage requirements will look like.
Yeah. And cost, right? I mean, that's always the fun.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm storing a terabyte of data.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a consideration.
For sure.
It's great. Well, hey, Bobby, as we're coming to the end of the show here as well, anything you've got coming up soon, or any interesting information regarding, App Fabric that you want to tell the audience about? Maybe where they can learn more information about the service.
Yeah, no, certainly. There's so we've got we talked about the applications that are on the list, right? Our intention is to drive that thing up to somewhere near 100 integrated applications in the near future. If you want to be one of
Nice.
those, feel free to reach out to us because we're interested in having a very wide, diverse set of applications that are connected to AppFabric, and we're happy if yours is one of them. There's also a link to the AppFabric page where you can find other demos that are like this one but different. Cover different applications that we've connected to, or different presentations on various um, other things that AppFabric does. Like we covered security on this particular show, but AppFabric also has a productivity side. You probably saw it in the very first slide that I showed. It was kind of near the
Right.
bottom, but since we were focused on security, I just didn't talk about it that much. But there is a productivity feature that's going to be coming soon to AppFabric, and it's sort of a generative AI productivity feature that would allow your users to get information about the things that are happening in all of the other applications within your application. Let's say you wanted to you imagine that your user has a chat application and your users have a video conferencing application, and but they're doing something in your application and they want to know things that's happening in the other ones. In today's world, you
Right.
just go to those things and you say, well, this call happened over here, and then I talked to Bobby in the chat, and then Bobby said that we're supposed to have a meeting later, so that's on my calendar. It's possible with AppFabric to get all of that information coalesced into one place, and you can put that within your application if that's something that you would be interested in. Those are the AppFabric productivity features. You can find information on that also on the AppFabric page.
Wow, fantastic. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for being with us here today, for joining us on the show. Thank you again to everyone that joined us live on the show and commented into the chat. Looked like we had a pretty active chat session going on today. Some great questions from the audience as well. Want to make sure and tell everybody once again, be sure to grab the link here to the AWS AppFabric homepage. If you want to find out more information, you can always reach out to any of us directly, either on LinkedIn or any of our other contact information, if you're interested in learning more about this subject. Also, of course, please feel free to reach out to your own account teams as well within AWS, and they'd be glad to help you all out. So, we do have one more show left in this particular season of Building SaaS on AWS that's coming up in 2 weeks here. I think Bill put a notice into the chat, but we are going to have some additional representatives from AWS to come in and talk a little bit more about generative AI. And specifically, we have a partner that will be joining them as well, Skyflow. So, really looking forward to that. To all of you and to Bobby, thank you again for being here. And we will talk. We will talk again soon on the next episode of Building SaaS on AWS. Until then, happy building, everybody.